we'll give it a few minutes for folks to join us. Okay, I'll go ahead and start the session. I just want to say welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ashley Raphael, and I'm part of the Gang Alternative family. We would like to welcome you to our third live Q&A session on about your rights with what's going on as we navigate through this time. You'll be asked to ask your questions via the chat or the Q&A button on your screen. At the end of the presentation, I have Ms. Mandy Mills here from Legal Services that will be joining us, and she'll be talking about consumer protection during COVID-19. So when we get to the Q&A portion, please feel free throughout the presentation to go ahead and ask your questions during the chat through the Q&A. But I would like to remind you as you ask your questions, please do not include any personal information. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Mandy. She's our attorney today from Legal Services. And she can go ahead and start with her presentation.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Like Ashley said, my name is Mandy Mills. I'm an attorney at Legal Services. I've been with them for nearly 13 years now. I've handled a range of legal issues there for them, but currently I am in our consumer unit where we handle a range of consumer topics. And I'm going to go over them with you today in general so that you have a good baseline of what you need to know about your rights when it comes to debt collection, student loan issues, identity theft, auto fraud issues, which we handle. So I'm going to go through those topics generally so that then when we talk about the COVID-19 CARES Act protections, you have a frame of reference. And also, you know, during this time of COVID-19, a lot of the legal issues have been, cases have been stagnant. Nothing's really moving too fast. Nobody's doing much of anything, but we anticipate very soon now that some businesses are opening up, people are going back to work, including debt collectors and others who, or car lots are opening. We expect people to start experiencing increased collection, mortgage related issues, foreclosures. So it's just good to know about these topics and what your rights are and what your obligations are as well. So, all right, so during this presentation, we're gonna talk about debt collection, garnishment, the possible harassment during the debt collection process and what you can do about it, identity theft issues, auto fraud issues, student loans, and then finally the COVID-19 and CARES Act protections. So generally, just know that if you have a debt and you're not paying, you can be sued on the debt. It's very possible and it happens all the time. But, and some information I gave you here today, I want you to just know it in the back of your mind so that one day if you're ever impacted, you remember, wait a minute, I heard about this, maybe I have some rights regarding this, or maybe I have some obligations regarding this topic. So I want you to know that if you have a debt, there are time limits by which a creditor or debt collector can sue you. So in Florida, it's 5 years on a written contract for an oral contract. And a lot of people always ask, can I go to jail for not paying my debts? That's a big question I get asked all the time. And the answer is no. So just, you can feel better about that. If you do get sued for a debt, generally I want you to know that you're entitled to notice. So you get served with the lawsuit. That's actually good for you because you're entitled to be told when somebody is suing you, something's going on in your name. And know that there are some deadlines for you to respond. Here I wrote, it's 20 days for you to respond to lawsuits. You should attend all hearing dates. The creditor who sues you, they're called a plaintiff. They could get a judgment against you that says you owe them X amount of dollars, all right? So that's the end goal for this person who has sued you, to get a judgment that says you owe them X amount of dollars. So when that happens, just know that judgments do go on your credit report for about 7.5 years. And but the person who sued you can make attempts to collect from you for up to 20 years, or at least 20 years, I should say. So it's a long time, it sticks with you. So it's a big deal if you get sued. We do handle debt collection issues. If you have any questions about that for you or your clients, you can contact legal services to, you can speak to me and I can see whether we can assist you or give you information to help. Getting a judgment helps a plaintiff because they then can take advantage of some court collection tools called garnishment and levy. You probably have heard of garnishment before. There are two main types: garnishment of a person's paycheck and garnishment of a bank account. So when a plaintiff they want to collect from you because you're not paying your judgment voluntarily, they want to force you to pay now. So they ask the court for a writ of garnishment against your paycheck. And that writ gets sent to your job, and your job has to set aside 25% of your disposable wages. So you still get 75%, but they have to take 25%. And just know that somebody you owe money to, a creditor, they can't do this until they sue you and win and get a judgment. So until that happens, this isn't going to be a problem. But once they do, they could get a writ of garnishment against you and ask the court to take 25% of your paycheck. But there's a way to try to stop the taking of this money from your paycheck. Some types of money is exempt from garnishment. And I have a list here. It's not an all-inclusive list. I just named like the big ones. Wages of a head of family. If you provide more than half the support for a child or some other dependent, you're a head of family and 100% of your paycheck is protected. Reemployment assistance or unemployment compensation. I list that here now because that's big right now. A lot of people are on reemployment assistance, formerly known as unemployment compensation. And Social Security is 100% protected. But you have to tell the court that your money that's being taken is protected. So you need to file something called a claim of exemption form. There's a deadline for you to do it. I listed here 20 days. There's a court hearing where you go in and show the court or prove to the court that you are entitled to these exemptions, and then the court decides yes or no. And if the court decides that you're entitled to the exemption, you get your money back, okay? And the garnishment stops. The other collection tool is levy, which maybe not everybody's heard of that, but that's essentially where the plaintiff realizes you have some sort of property of value, personal property, so they want to go take it and sell it and get the money to pay towards the judgment you owe. So just know that that's a possibility. They usually go after cars because that's the most valuable piece of personal property that people have. The sheriff comes, takes your property after the plaintiff gets a writ of execution, and your property will be sold at an auction. And then they use that money to apply to a judgment. But just like with garnishment, there's a way to protect your property. Certain types of property are protected. So in Florida, we've got a $1,000 personal property exemption under our Constitution. An additional $4,000 you could protection you can apply to whatever property you want, but that's only if you don't claim a homestead exemption, homeowner. Okay, and then an additional $1,000 specifically for use on cars. And there's a process to claim your exemption. You have to file an inventory of all your property within a certain number of days, and there'll be a court hearing where the court decides whether your property is protected. And then if it is, you get your property back. So let's talk about collection harassment. If you've ever owed debts, you're not paying, you get a lot of phone calls, you get a lot of letters, maybe people you assist have this happening to them. the biggest takeaway I want you to know very briefly is there are state and federal laws that protect against certain types of harassment and deceptive and unfair practices in the act of collecting. So, you know, a lot of people are falling behind on their payments right now. Not a lot's going on because courts have not necessarily been having hearings or moving cases forward. But I anticipate, because people have been falling behind these last few months, to see an onslaught of collection activity. And we want to make sure that people aren't subjected to any unfair practices or harassment in the meantime. So if that's happening to you, or you are helping people where that's happening, you can send them our way as well, and we can talk to them. And just know that there is, if you're being collected on by a debt collector, not an original creditor, but like, oh, you owe money to Capital One, they're an original creditor. But if they sell your debt to someone else, a different company, they're called a debt collector. There's a special law that says you can write to them and say, stop contacting me. That's a big protection. So I wanted to mention that in this presentation. I wanted to also talk about bankruptcy as well, because that's a strategy to use in dealing with debt. So if after all of this, through COVID-19, people have fallen into debt that they just know they're never going to be able to get out of, even if they're making minimum payments or whatever payments they can afford, bankruptcy is an option to evaluate. They speak to an attorney about whether it's right for them. Some people it's right for them, some people it's not. But when it is right for you, it is a protection, actually. It gives people a fresh start when, you know, they otherwise wouldn't be able to. I apologize, my dog is home here with me. So, all right. So I wanted to throw in here information about identity theft, because we've heard reports of various scams going on, you know, people selling fake, you know, COVID tests, or telling you, oh, if you want your economic impact payment from the IRS, you know, they get calls, you have to give us your social security number in order to get your payment. There's so many scams. So people are at increased risk of identity theft these days. And also, we live in South Florida, which is the identity theft capital of the United States. So I want you to be aware that there are steps that people can take to try to lessen the damage of identity theft. Close accounts that you learn are open fraudulently. You can put fraud alerts on your credit reports simply by calling any one of the credit bureaus, Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. There are even heightened security protections you could put on your credit report beyond just an initial fraud alert. You should file an ID theft complaint with the Federal Trade Commission, file a police report. I can tell you the police hate taking reports for identity theft, but just tell them you need an offense incident report, because the police report together with your FTC identity theft complaint equals a package called an ID theft report, which then you can use that to help block certain information on your credit report that is fraudulent. All right, and just know that if you're experiencing tax fraud as well, the IRS has special forms for reporting that kind of tax fraud. And you should call the Social Security Administration too if your Social Security number is compromised. All right, I could talk all day about auto fraud. It's not really something that's, I don't know that it's really impacted by COVID-19 right now, but I do know that dealers are very hard up to sell cars right now because nobody's going out there to buy cars. So we hope that we don't see an onslaught of scams or just worse deals than the very bad deals we see going on even pre-COVID. So but I just want you to know that we handle auto fraud cases and which relate to any issues in the car purchase process, maybe the later repossession if something goes wrong, or if there are any like structural or mechanical issues with a car. All right. Federal student loans, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but I am going to talk about some COVID and CARES Act protections about these later. But just know that there are various repayment plans for federal student loans. It's like balance driven, like standard repayment plan or income driven, which are very helpful. These income driven repayment plans. If you have student loans and they're federal, you really want to look into getting into one of these income driven repayment plans to make your payment affordable. And then after a certain number of years, usually 20 to 25, any amount that's not paid off gets forgiven. Just know that there are some categories of people for whom the U.S. Department of Education will completely discharge your federal student loan. Well, one is if you die, you don't owe the money anymore, and your family, your estate does not owe that money either. Your loans are discharged if you pass. If you are totally and permanently disabled, you can get a discharge of your loans. And for all of these I have listed, there are special, very simple, usually 1 or 2 pages, application forms on the U.S. Department of Education's website. Closed school issues. So, this might be a problem with the COVID-19. Not sure, if some schools might not reopen, might not come back. If a school closes while you're attending, you can ask to have your student loans that you incurred while you were there discharged. There are certain false certification discharges and unpaid refund. I'm not going to go all into those, but just know if you have issues with student loans and you're unable to pay, you could contact us and we could walk you through them to see if any of them apply to you. Know that the U.S. Department of Education can collect from you in various ways. They can garnish your wages without even having to sue you. They can jump right in and take 15% of your disposable pay. You get Social Security, they can offset your Social Security. They could intercept your refund, your tax refund, or file a lawsuit against you. Whoops. There are various ways to try to avoid these types of collection efforts by the federal government. Like, you can ask for a hearing if you get notice that you're about to be garnished, your wages are about to be garnished. You can just try to make little payments, even if it's not really the full amount you owe, to try to avoid garnishment being imposed. You could, if you have more than one loan, you could consolidate your loans, which now you have a fresh new loan that is current because you paid off the ones that are in default. Or you could rehabilitate your loans if you're in default. Just know that that's like a special process. You have to talk to your servicer, loan servicer, sign an agreement. There are steps to take, but it's very helpful. And after 9 payments within 10 months, you come out of default status. All right. Private student loans are not like federal loans. None of these programs that I just talked about for federal loans apply. None of them. But some private loan companies might have their own various repayment plans. And private loans, though, are similar to federal loans in that it's very difficult to discharge them in a bankruptcy. All right, so COVID-19 CARES Act implications and protections. So locally, in Miami-Dade County, the court is still open, it's functioning, but there are no in-person hearings except for like in the criminal area, which I do not practice in, so I don't know all the ins and outs, but there, like, no in-person hearings, no jury trials, everything is by Zoom hearing. Even evidentiary hearings. So there are workarounds, and the courts worked really hard to be able to make that happen. So cases can still proceed. So not everything's on hold. Just things have been going very slow, and they've developed this capacity to conduct these hearings using Zoom. All deadlines for anything court related have been extended and are due through June 1st. Which is coming up in about a week and a half or so, or 2 weeks. You might have heard this in the last presentation, but I put a little segment in here about evictions. There's the statewide moratorium on evictions. It was extended to June 2nd. But if a property has a federally backed loan, the moratorium is extended to June 30th. So that federally backed loan information comes from the federal government. The statewide came from, obviously, our governor. So in Miami-Dade County, there's a new administrative order that came out from the courts that said plaintiffs now who want to evict someone have to make a declaration in their eviction lawsuit that they have to indicate whether if there's a loan on the property, whether it's federally backed. economic impact payments. So we talked about garnishment. I wanted you to have the baseline of information on that, because when talking about economic impact payments, I want you to know that they were not specifically exempt from garnishment under the CARES Act. The CARES Act did say, oh, the government can't offset your economic impact payment, meaning like if you owed some student loan money, or if you owed taxes, normally the government can offset, like say, oh, you owe us, but we owe you. Well, before we pay you, we're going to kind of take what you owe us first. The CARES Act said they're not going to do that with these economic impact payments. But what they left out was, what about creditors? What if you were sued by Capital One and there's a judgment against you? There's nothing in the CARES Act that says, oh, they can't garnish your bank account once that money hits. So that's a problem. We haven't seen really anybody come in, but I think it's just a function of maybe the court's not holding those hearings. I'm not sure. And a lot of people have already gotten their money, and then I think the next round of money is coming in on like debit cards. So hopefully this won't be a problem. But we were very concerned at first. But if you see that happen to someone where their economic impact money has been taken from garnishment, please call us. We're very interested in that. Student loans. All right, so the CARES Act changed a lot of things about student loans to help protect people. So, but remember, these only apply to federal or federally backed loans, not private. Federal loans. For all federal loans, they automatically just changed whatever interest rate you had, that they were put at 0%. So 0% interest rate on all loans from March 13th to September 30th this year. All loans automatically were put in an administrative forbearance from March 13th to September 30th this year. It just happened without you even asking. Now, then, if you want to pay for some reason, if you want to make these payments, you can call up your student loan servicer and say, take me out of that administrative forbearance. If you had automatic debits, though, making your payments like I did, they automatically stopped. I did not have to do anything to stop the payments. For all these months that go by, the student loan companies that are servicing your loans should be reporting each month as being current for those payments. So you're not making the payment, but you're still current because you're in a forbearance, right? But it shouldn't show forbearance, it should show current, all right? And these months do count towards any student loan forgiveness program you might be taking part in, like the public service student loan forgiveness program. Even though you're not technically making a payment, you're being counted as making a payment. It counts as one of your months that you have to accumulate to get to your 120 qualified monthly payments. If you were in default at the time, you know, the COVID-19 exploded and the CARES Act was implemented, the CARES Act says the federal government will not engage in any administrative wage garnishment, will not take your tax refund at this time, will not offset any federal benefits when normally they could. This is why I wanted to mention all that stuff to you first, so that you knew what I was talking about here. So this is limited, time limited. Everything is limited to this, you know, March 13th to September 30 time period, unless for some reason there's an extension. So right now, no federal benefits or refunds or anything will be taken, and your wages will not be garnished to collect any federal student loans. Mortgage foreclosure issues. My consumer unit handles a lot of foreclosure matters. So there is currently a foreclosure moratorium for federally backed mortgages only. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, a few others. So if you have a federally backed mortgage on your property, you're a homeowner, the mortgage company cannot, and let's say you're behind, they cannot file a foreclosure against you or move for any foreclosure judgment against you through the end of this moratorium. So it was just recently extended to June 30th. It was going to expire a couple days ago on May 17th. Separately, though, if you have a federally backed mortgage, you can ask for a forbearance, which is where you just ask to not be responsible for making a payment on the mortgage. You can request a forbearance for up to 180 days. All you have to attest is that you have a COVID-19 hardship. They're not going to ask you to prove it. You just say you do, and they're not allowed to really ask you to provide any more information than that. If the hardship still is extending to 180 days, you can ask for an extension to another 180 days. And you can ask for this regardless of whether you were delinquent, before COVID-19 hit, or before the CARES Act, or you were current. It doesn't matter. You can ask for this forbearance. Key is there's only a short time frame for when you can ask for this forbearance. It's from basically now. Okay, it started when the law was passed through when the national emergency is over, or December 31st this year, whichever happens first. So if President Trump says national emergency is over July 1st, then guess what? Like, you have to request that forbearance before July 1st. Okay. Very important to know that if you get a forbearance, you still owe the money. You still owe your mortgage. We were concerned about this at first because back in the housing crisis, a decade ago, a lot of people were given forbearances and whatnot. And then suddenly at the end of the forbearance, the mortgage companies would say, okay, you owe us the 6 months that you have not paid, like right now. You owe it right now. Who has the money? And it was causing foreclosures. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA have all said, no, we're not going to do it like that. There are some options available for when the forbearance period ends, like maybe enter into a repayment plan on top of your normal ongoing mortgage, maybe get a loan modification, maybe tack on what you owe to the back of the loan and extend the number of months you're paying on your loan. So there's various options. So we'll see how that plays out, but we're concerned that there will be rogue servicers out there, and trust me, they're out there causing all kinds of problems that aren't going to follow the rules and give people grief. So please send people to us if you or people you're helping are having mortgage problems at the end of these forbearance periods or at the end of the moratorium. Credit reporting. The CARES Act did not give a lot of protections to consumers when it comes to creditors reporting information on their consumer's credit report. All it says, and I'll just read it here, that if a furnisher, which is the word used for a creditor who's furnishing information onto a person's credit report, if they make an accommodation like giving a deferment or forbearance or any kind of loan modification anytime from January 31st this year through 120 days after the national emergency ends, so that's a moving date, who knows when the national emergency will end, then through that time, the furnisher shall report the credit account as current, or if the credit account was already delinquent before the accommodation was made, they can keep reporting the account as delinquent, or if during the time of the accommodation the consumer brings their account current, then they have to switch the status that they're reporting from delinquent to current. But what is very good is during this time, actually through April 2021, all 3 credit bureaus are offering free weekly, you can access your credit report for free once a week through April 2021. Normally you get 1 free from each per year. This is like 1 free per week. All right, so very good. Let's make sure I didn't miss anything here. I gave some links to some helpful websites here. I want you to know about a company called the National Consumer Law Center. Us lawyers are trained by them often. They put out materials that are so helpful. They're devoted to consumer law issues. If you go to their website, nclc.org, you can click around and find information available to consumers. I do have a specific link here to a page they have for major consumer protections in response to COVID-19. If you even just Googled that, the first search option would be this page. And they do a great job of just describing all the protections nationwide. And even they started creating lists of what state by state is doing. Okay, I put in a link to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau site where they have a page for renter help. And it explains how a renter can find out, does my landlord have a federally backed mortgage? Am I protected under the CARES Act for all the protections given to properties with a federally backed mortgage? And so it gives links to where they can go and check whether the property they're living in has a mortgage that's federally backed on it. Okay. And then a similar site on the CFPB website for mortgage relief options. So that is it. I'm open for questions now.
Thank you, Mandy, so much for your presentation. We'll go ahead and open up the floor now for any questions. Please feel free to ask questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or through the chat box. And please remember to not include any personal information when you're sending these questions. So we have a few questions in. The first question is, what can be done if you have a debt that you've never incurred yourself, but because there have been payments made on the account, the creditors will not remove it?
So I guess that means whoever fraudulently opened the account also made payments at some time. No, you should still, if it's not your account, you need to file a dispute with the credit bureau. You only need to do one, really. You can do all. For myself, I did all. They have the ability for you to submit a dispute online. My suggestion is to do it in writing. Send a letter detailing like the debt that's being reported, so that it's easily identifiable by the credit bureau, so they know what you're talking about, and state what is wrong with it. Like, this is not mine, or let's say it was yours, but you disagree with the amount. Like you think, oh God, I've paid like half this off. This amount is wrong. So identify the debt that's being reported, and then the thing you think is wrong with the reporting of it. They have a certain number of days under the Fair Credit Reporting Act to investigate. They'll send your dispute to the creditor or credit furnisher. That's what we call them in that world. And they are required to do like a reinvestigation of the debt. I'll tell you, mostly they'll respond, oh no, this is a valid debt, it's yours. And then at that point, the next step, if you still disagree, you sue them. You sue the credit reporting, the credit bureau and the creditor. That's unfortunately, that's like the next step. You have to affirmatively sue them. You could also, you could sue them for, there are some state laws like the Florida Consumer Collection Practices Act that makes it unlawful for somebody to collect a debt that is not legitimate, or to assert they have a right that is not legitimate when it comes to debt collection. So there are a lot of consumer attorneys out there that would, if you were able to actually show them like, this is not my debt, like, and there's merit to your case, that would love to sue these creditors, whoever it is that's continuing to try to collect from you. I'll tell you, if you want to learn about local consumer attorneys who take these kind of cases, you need to visit the website for the it's NACA, National Association of Consumer Advocates. I believe it's consumeradvocates.org, consumeradvocates.org. And I'm a member, other attorneys at legal services are members, but there are private attorneys who are members, and they vet all of their members to make sure that these attorneys only represent consumers, do not represent companies. And so they're well respected, vetted to be a part of this group, take part in many consumer trainings, give the trainings. So you go to this website, there's a button for like find an attorney. You could search by state and by legal area. So you could, search for like debt collection or credit reporting, and then you search for Florida, and you'll see all the attorneys, all the consumer attorneys in Florida who handle these cases. So I hope that's helpful. But you have to make a dispute. If they're not removing the debt, you have to dispute it, and then if they still don't remove it, you have to sue them.
Our next question is, are the courts postponing or delaying the start of garnishments or levies for individuals who have lost their jobs due to the outbreak?
So there is no specific, stoppage of those kind of cases. But we just haven't seen them. So I think informally, either creditors aren't asking for writs of garnishment, or the courts aren't issuing. Even if the creditors ask, maybe the clerks in the courts are not issuing these writs. Something like that must be happening. Either the creditors aren't asking for them, or the courts aren't just issuing them, because we are not seeing cases come through our door right now for garnishment or levy. But I expect it to happen now because businesses are opening up. The courts are now very comfortable with conducting Zoom hearings. They've been like ramping up to that. So I think as they realize people are able to return to work and we'll be getting more, regular income, we're going to see those cases. But just a technical answer to your question, no, there's no, like where there's an eviction moratorium, that's straight up like, yes, there's a moratorium. There is no such thing for garnishment and levy right now.
So we have several questions about companies giving credits versus a full refund. So for example, what if I've paid for a flight and the airline gives me a credit versus a refund? Or if I rented a venue for an event that couldn't occur because of COVID, and they're telling me that I can only use my deposit for future use?
Those scenarios are going to be driven by the contract you sign. So if you booked a venue, I'm sure there's a contract that you sign. You have to read it. The whole relationship is driven by that contract. There might be like force majeure clauses or things like that that explain what happens in the event something happens that causes the event you're planning not to proceed. So you have to read the contract. For flights, I'm sure there's kind of a contractual relationship too. I'm sure you've agreed to something by way of your purchase. You probably clicked through when you booked online that said like terms and conditions. Yeah, I read it. You really need to look at what terms govern your commercial relationship with the airline or the event space you were trying to book. It's going to be driven by that.
The next question is there a way to get tax relief for COVID-related purchases? So perhaps in the event of like a small business or...
That's an interesting question. I have not heard anything about there being tax relief for we want to buy masks for everyone. I haven't heard of there being any tax relief for that. I know our administration of legal services said they bought some reusable masks for everyone, and they didn't mention, oh, we got a great tax break on this. It's just not something I've heard at all. I'm sorry, I don't, that doesn't mean there isn't, but I just don't know the answer.
Okay. For the next question, if someone is considered disabled, for example, due to back issues, but they're still able to work, how can they still qualify for student debt forgiveness?
hold on a second. They're disabled. Oh, so they have a disability, but they are able to work. So I guess this is about the total and permanent disability discharge of student loans. Okay, so like I was saying, the administrative loan discharges have application forms. So when you look at the total and permanent disability application form, so on that form, there's two ways to you have to bear with me, my children are coming home, but so one way to get the total and permanent disability is to be receiving Social Security disability or VA benefits, and if you get Social Security, you have to have a medical review scheduled for 5 years or more. If your medical review is slated for less than 5 years, like 3 years at a time, then you can't use the fact that you get Social Security disability benefits as to automatically qualify you for the total and permanent disability. You would then have to use one of the pages on the application form for your doctor to fill out, and your doctor will fill out what your disability is, like what you've been diagnosed with, what your treatment is, what medication you're on, and then he or she will sign it, and then you submit that to they use Nelnet to process their disability applications. So if you have a bad back, you could work, but see, it's not that you could work. Just know that you might be able to work a certain amount of time, but maybe you can't work an 8-hour day without an excessive number of breaks. You might not be considered a person who actually could work, without getting into too much detail about that. But so just know that if you get Social Security benefits or VA disability benefits, there's a possibility, depending on when your medical reviews are, that fact alone qualifies you for the total and permanent disability discharge. If not, the other way to get the discharge is have your doctor fill out the page on that application for doctors, and let the doctor describe what your impairments are, and then you submit that, and then let Nelnet decide. Now, when you do get a discharge, though, just know you get your discharge. If they approve you, you do get your discharge, but they have a 3-year monitoring period. So, and during that 3 years, once a year, they will send you a 1-pager that says, have you worked and earned between X amount of dollars? And you just check yes or no. And if you have earned more than this amount that's listed in the form, you may be considered not disabled anymore, and they could reinstate your loans. So there's an amount that you could work and still get this total and permanent disability discharge, but there's an excessive amount you could work that could cause you to lose it.
So we have time for just a few more questions. Please, if you have any more questions, please continue to put them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. The next question is, I've noticed the price on my grocery bill has been a little bit higher since the outbreak started. Is there anything I can do? I think there's price gouging going on.
So I noticed that too. There's some things that are just pricier. There have been reports of disruptions in the food chain. So I think if a price is validly higher because something costs more, I don't know that there's a problem with that. But price gouging, you should contact the Florida Attorney General's office. If you just Google Florida price gouging hotline, I'm sure there's a number. The Attorney General's office deals with price gouging.
So this will actually be our last question for the day. We'll go ahead and send the rest of the questions to legal services and have the answers available for everyone to see on our website. So the last question is, if you haven't received your stimulus payment check yet, what should you do?
So I'm not quite sure how to pull this up on my computer without losing my screen that I'm sharing with you. There is on the IRS website, I'm just gonna try to pull it up on my phone, irs.gov. Okay, there's a link that says Get My Payment. And that's where you can check on the status of your economic impact payment. If you fill it out, it'll let you get your payment status, see your payment type, meaning like whether I think it's gonna be direct deposit or you're gonna get it on that card. And you're gonna have to provide your bank information, okay? All right, so that's what I would say to finding out where your payment is.
Much. This again was our last session of our three-part series on knowing your rights during COVID-19. This session was recorded and will be available to everyone on our GA website at www.myga.org. You'll also find additional questions. If there are any other questions that come in over the next few minutes, we'll go ahead and send them over to legal services and post the answers as well as the presentation on the website. So please be sure to take a look. We want to say thank you so much to Legal Services of Greater Miami for being such a great partner to Gang Alternative. Thank you, Mandy, for providing us with this really vital information. It's going to be so helpful for us as a community to really understand what our rights are. And I want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope that you found this series helpful and encourage you to visit our website for more information. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for having me.